I want you to know that that was a digital handshake, just in case you're taking pictures. It's completely digital. Oh my gosh, it is so good to be in front of an actual live audience. I'm going to probably keep thinking you're actually a projection on a screen, because I don't really believe life is coming back to normal. Now, just this afternoon, I left from the Houston Hobby Airport and flew to Pensacola, and then Ty drove me over here. And as I was flying from Houston over to Pensacola, I was reminded of a story of a New York businessman who had to fly down to Houston from Manhattan. Now, this man was a newlywed. He'd only been married for 6 months, and this was the first time he was separated from his beloved wife. And he missed her so dearly that the moment he checked into his Houston hotel, he pulled out his cell phone and he sent her an email. Unfortunately, in his haste, he typed in the wrong email address. And so rather than going to his wife in Manhattan, the email went to an 85-year-old woman in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, this woman had been married for 60 years, and just the night before, her husband had passed away in his sleep. But she was doing well. She had much support in her church community. But that night, the woman disappeared. People searched up and they were getting nervous. And then somebody remembered that this was a grandma who knew how to use her computer. And so they went to look in the study. And when they opened the door, they found the poor woman passed out in front of her computer. And nobody could understand why. She seemed to be doing so well. And then somebody thought to look at the computer screen. And this is what they read. "To my dearest wife, I have arrived safely. I am awaiting your arrival next week. P.S. I suggest you wear shorts because it's awfully hot down here." All right, now you're awake. Okay. Danger of email. Danger. Okay. Now, I want to talk to you. We're going to do a couple talks here. First of all, my understanding is I have a mixture of maybe teachers, staff, and parents. Who are my teachers? Okay. What about staff folks? Some staff, and are there some parents? Oh, there are no parents. Oh, okay, too. You're the token parents. Okay, well, that's good. Of course, a lot of you teachers may be parents as well, right? But anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of a classical education. And of course, we're lucky because you get to have a classical Christian education. And I want to tell you how much I believe in classical education. I've been doing this for about 20 years. And whenever I could, I would bring my children with me. I would take them to places like this, especially if I could drive. I'd take them to ACCS and SCL, all over. And they got to see firsthand how wonderful these schools are, how much camaraderie there is between the faculty, how much they enjoy teaching. You know what I love? How many of you teach grammar school? Oh, a lot of, there we go, okay. What I love is when I come in and do an in-service and talk about real technical things, and guess who's taking the most notes? Invariably, the second and third grade teachers, right here, okay? And and this is important because this is a classical school. And they see already, she's already taking notes. She's taking notes about taking notes. That's really good, right? See? I mean, but think about it. What you're understanding, well, first of all, you're enjoying a little adult conversation, okay? But it's more than that. You understand that at a school like this, what I say may not literally go into your classroom, but you understand that everybody from kindergarten to 12th grade is working through the same vision, the same classical Christian vision, and it's important. You know, have any of you ever taught at a public school before this? Oh, so some of you know. In a public school, the high school teachers, they never hobnob with the grammar school teachers. It doesn't happen. But at a school like this, these schools, there's much more camaraderie because you understand we're all part of the same vision and mission. There's much less burnout at these schools, even though you work hard and get paid less. It's a private school, right? There's much less burnout. Well, my son teaches grammar school Latin, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade at the Geneva School of Bernie. Bernie is right next to San Antonio, Texas. Anybody want to tell me how to spell Bernie? You'll get a prize today. Do you know? It's a good guess, but it's B-O-E-R-N-E. and it's pronounced Bernie. Don't ask me why. That's a regular classical Christian, but my daughter lives in Louisville, Texas, which is right near Dallas, and she teaches at a classical charter school, middle school music. Now, it's a public school, but it's what C.S. Lewis calls smuggled theology, okay? Because it's all run by Christians, and they're probably going to be, all put in jail within the next year. But anyway, they're working hard. But why did my kids choose to teach? Because they saw that there was joy. They saw there was, and guess what? I just told you my son is teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. It's pretty hard to get men to teach kids, but it's different because more and more male teachers are going into it because they see it as for them too, right? There's a kind of rigor that appeals to the male teachers as much, and of course the female teachers love having them there. They're always trying to match them up, but they haven't worked yet. We'll see. Alabama girl, let me know. He's 26. Just let me know. Anyway, it's part of my job. I'm a father. So. What I want to talk about is a little bit about the vision that makes classical education unique. What you're doing, to give you a little bit of visionary stuff. I'll cover as much as I can, and we'll have time for Q&A or whatever. I'm here until I leave tomorrow at, 4:30 or something. So if you just catch me, ask me questions, please. And by the way, I'm doing the book signing, but if you already own one of my books, please bring it so I can sign it as well, okay? But anyway, as most of you know, at the foundation of classical education is what they call the trivium, right? It's grammar, logic, and rhetoric, right? And generally at a school like this, you're going to refer to them not as grammar school, middle school, and high school, but grammar school, logic school, and rhetoric school. For some reason, public schools kept grammar, so they just don't understand what it means. But otherwise, and by the way, just so you know, if you're a stickler on this, there's another name for logic, and that's... oh my God, it's one of my mind. Dialectic, yeah. So if you've ever seen that, generally at these schools they go by logic, but sometimes, like if you're reading Dorothy Sayers, she'll use the word dialectic, but it still is logic, okay? It's that same 1, 2, 3. And you are taking the students through a curriculum that follows that step-by-step process. Now, some of you probably know that it really got started again with Dorothy Sayers, who knew C.S. Lewis and was friends with him, wrote the Lord Peter Wimsey, and she was an apologist too. She gave a lecture and an essay about recovering the lost tools of learning. But what Sayers did that made it a little more influential is that she talked about the old medieval trivium, that means the 3 ways, the old medieval trivium, but she was informing it with the new rise in studies in the way children develop. Remember that guy Piaget, the developmental stage? Didn't talk about Piaget, but she's understanding that the 3 parts of the trivium sort of overlap with the way the human mind develops and children develop. So it's a system that makes sense academically, but it also makes sense sort of in terms of the way the mind grows. Now, I want to make this very clear, and I don't think I have to sell you on this, but you may have to sell parents on it, okay? At the core of grammar, right, kindergarten to 5th grade, at the core of grammar is learning all the basic building blocks of all the different majors. And to learn the building blocks means a lot of memorization. Now, if I was giving this speech 100 years ago, that would be like a duh moment, right? But unfortunately, some bozo came up with the phrase rote memorization, which somehow sounds evil and cruel and penal, okay? And took away from something that's absolutely necessary to education. You need to have that memorized foundation. One of the most important groups you can join in any church, does this church have what's called Awanas? Okay, do you have a Bible memorization group? Okay, you might have your own name, okay, but like Vacation Bible School, but don't just do it one week in the summer, okay? A good church is going to have something for the kids where they are memorizing the Bible. And do you understand what I say when I tell you the Bible verse I memorized when I was 10, I know that better than the Bible verse I memorized last week? You can understand that? You've already forgotten my point. See, that's it. You've already forgotten. Okay. Those are the things that what the 3 things that happen when you get older. The first one is that you start losing your memory. The second one is, okay, anyway, a little bit slow. Oh, we're waking you up here, okay. So I can't impress this on you enough, and you need to impress it on your parents, that memorization is good and it's a necessary tool, and they shouldn't feel embarrassed and think that you're being, quote, medieval. Well, first of all, we are being medieval, okay? You tell them that this school is absolutely cutting edge for the 14th century. You can tell them that, and you can say it with pride, okay? So again, it's one of these things that something gets a label on it and it destroys. I'll give you an opposite example. The very worst thing in education now is what they call standardized exams, okay? And I'm from Texas, and when George Bush was governor, he put in those standardized exams, which are terrible because everybody teaches to the exam. But guess what? Nobody can ever get rid of them because Bush or whoever his people decided to call that program accountability. Now, is there any politician from the right or left that's going to go in and say, I think I'm going to get rid of accountability? So we're stuck with them forever because of that stupid word, okay? Well, on the other hand, because people keep saying rote memorization and have this idea of a mindless robot, you are robbing kids not only of what they need as a foundation, but here's the fun part. Children in that age group of 5 to 10 love to memorize. Have you noticed that? And they take great pride in their ability to memorize. I told you my son teaches grammar school, and like his dad, he memorized the poem Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson, to strive, to seek, to find, because he knows that, not to yield, and taught it to the kids. And they presented it, I think, maybe in February. Well, I went and visited his school in May when they were doing their closing picnic, and I got to meet the kids. And I said to them, my son told me that you know Ulysses. And I said to them, come, my friends, and then all of them recited the whole rest of it together. And you know how kids get that huge grin on their face? They're so proud of themselves. Okay, so it's not only necessary pedagogically, the students excel in it and they enjoy it and they take pride in it. When you're home, those of you that are parents too of young kids, ask them to say it out loud. And you'll see how happy they are, okay? Because they want to show off a little bit, but in a good way. So we begin with grammar by going over all the building blocks, all the linchpins, okay? I mean, I don't know if you noticed this, but a lot of even adults today, if they're playing Trivial Pursuit, they might be able to get a bunch of different historical facts right, but they have no idea how to put them together in a sequence. Like they're just all over the place. I remember this was 20 years ago. I've been teaching for 30 years at HBU. I obviously started when I was 15 teaching. I remember I was telling them about Milton, and I said, does anybody know the name of the leader of the Puritan Revolution when they assassinated Charles I? And people are saying Winston Churchill, they're saying everything all over the place. And finally one guy said, he said, Oliver Cromwell? I said, yes, that's right. Now, I wish the kid had shut up, because he said, yeah, he took over England during the Battle of Hastings. I said, excuse me, that was a little bit earlier. That was 1060. No, in that fight against the Nazis. No, so, see, he had a name memorized, but he had no idea of the... So if you can memorize dates like 1066 or 1776 or 1789 or whatever, just memorize those dates. They will give you a framework that we can slowly flesh out as they move to the next stage. And traditionally in the trivium, you cover all the same material. Under the grammar, you can go from the Greeks to the modern, but then you do it again and you do it again, because you're doing it in a different way, on a higher level, using different skills. So you need to understand that there's a system to this. It's not a lockstep system. There's movement within. And those of you, again, we got the grammar school teachers, what you need to understand, that grammar not only does memorization, they use a lot of things like chants, right? Anyone recognize that? Okay? And little rituals and things. And my son, again, men tend to think, oh, that's some silly girl thing, okay? But they convinced him, and he started beginning his Latin with that thing, and the kids love it. He realized immediately they love it. It's like something in church, right? I'll never forget talking to a headmaster. It wasn't Thai, but talking to a headmaster, he said, oh yes, we teach our kids jingles like this and the Pater Noster. And I said, really? The Pater Noster is a jingle? So I teased him for the whole time I was there, actually. But anyway, all of this is important. It's not only building up the mind, it's nourishing an excitement for having a grasp of the history, the literature, the philosophy, the science. So you start. Then you move into logic, right? When you move into logic school, now you can start putting those building blocks together. Now they can start having a more defined understanding of the different majors or the different disciplines, almost all of which were invented by Aristotle. Aristotle wrote a treatise on basically every single one of the disciplines that are still here today, right? So we're moving up now. It's also called logic because this is when we're starting to teach the kids the rudimentaries of logical thinking and things like logical fallacies. And kids, Dorothy Sayers calls it the pert phase. The first phase she calls the poll parrot because they're repeating. Then she calls it, because they're all pert and they all want to win and stuff like that. Okay, now you're encouraging that a little bit better and you're getting them to think through and understand proper logical thinking. And that's something that's really lost in our country, as you know. And then as we move to the rhetoric phase, you've all heard that. What are the things that people fear the most? The two things they fear the most: death and speaking in front of a group. You've heard that? And many people put the second one higher, okay? Right? So, and how many of you noticed? I mean, I guess this has always been true to a certain extent, but more and more with the young kids, the inability to look you in the eye, to talk to you. Look, and of course now they have a mask on, so you really can't understand anything they're saying, okay? Oh my gosh. Rhetoric school is not only teaching them to speak publicly, which is extremely important, but it is teaching them how to defend a position, how to defend a worldview, how to distinguish between one worldview and another, right? So again, all along, it's the same basic material, but we keep, and if you send them to HBU, well, where I teach, whether they're in the honors college or the regular liberal arts core, we're going to continue that same process because we're classical Christian as well. We're going to continue the model that you've done. But again, don't tell your parents, don't pull your kids out in high school. They need to finish this whole thing because people get nervous. Oh, they'll never get into college. Okay, well, first of all, the college you want your kid to go to is probably not the one they should go to, okay? I don't understand it, okay? We were talking about Vodi Bakum, who I actually knew when he was a student. He wasn't a student of mine, but he was a student when I was there, and I knew him very well. And one time he got up in front of a group of homeschoolers and said, "You homeschoolers, you dedicate 18 years of your life, all the money, all the time, you do all this, maybe a university model, maybe a classical Christian, and then when they're 18 years old, for a little bit of vanity, you send them to Harvard so they can destroy in 3 months everything you spent 18 years doing." Now, hopefully you will prepare them well enough. But still, okay, let's support our schools and just give up and not let them convince us that there's something good there because they're not teaching the classics at all. They've abandoned so much of these things. So we need to build this. And now with what's going on in our country, this is our salvation right now. These classical, these homeschoolers and stuff like that. And it's not that old of a movement. I mean, it's coming at just the right time that we need it. All right, real quickly, I want to talk about 4 skills that, and I'm speaking to you now as a college professor, right? These are the skills I look to see in my incoming high schoolers. And these are the skills I see less and less and less of regular kids coming out of public schools or even your run-of-the-mill Christian school. But I am seeing them in classical Christian schools or charter schools. These kinds of things, okay? One of them is, and I just call this move beyond the surface. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You know, if you're taking freshman composition, you're going to write an essay where you have to talk about something that happened to you when you were a kid and then talk about the significance. In other words, how it changed you or shaped you as a person. And your typical student will do a very good job giving you a blow-by-blow description of what happened. And then when they come to the significance, and after that event, I was a different person. And boom. No, okay? We need to go deeper. Don't just tell me what Romeo and Juliet did or what Romeo and Juliet said. Tell me why. Tell me what their motivation is. Tell me what theme Shakespeare's trying to get across. And you need to understand that all people, including adults, we always want to hang on the surface because it's risky to go down deep and make analysis. Help a student to understand the difference between going over the plot analysis, plot summary, really, going over the plot summary, and then moving from summary to analysis. And to me, that's becoming more and more rare, the ability to that, because what do we do when we surf the internet on our smartphone? We're going along the surface, picking things up. We don't risk to go deeper. Still, at classical Christian schools, I'm seeing that skill still there, that desire to let go and dive down and get that pearl and stop hanging safely on the top. You need to understand why we're in so much danger, okay? What we call the cancel culture, okay? There are, the adults that are leading it, yes, they have nefarious reasons for doing it, okay? They're progressives, they're doing it. But why are the 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds going along with it? Well, some of them are going along with it because they're progressives, but most of them are going along with it because they're terrified of anybody contradicting them. They want a safe space where they don't have to hear a word that might make them feel uncomfortable. You see what I mean? They're not necessarily political, but they're playing into the hands of the people who are political because they don't like to be challenged in any way. Right? They don't like that feeling of, oh, that's awkward, right? That's worse to them than anything, feeling awkward. See, when Dorothy Sayers wrote her essay, it was about 70 years ago now, she said that when we send kids out that aren't trained in the trivium, we are sending them out as prey to the propagandists. Okay? She was writing back in the 40s when propaganda was pretty strong. From the far right and the far left, it was very, very strong. And if we don't equip them, they're just going to fall prey right away to anything. Right? So help them, challenge them, encourage them to take a risk, to try to make an argument. Now, tell them you might be wrong, okay? As I tell my students, because I teach English, when you're writing an analysis of an English work, there's more than one right answer. But there are wrong answers, okay? There are wrong answers. So don't let them, but do encourage them to try, to stretch themselves, to do that, okay? So move beyond the surface. The next one is what I call uncovering assumptions. We have been accustomed, it's been going on for at least 30 years now. You're familiar with the phrase a sound bite? When you're watching it on the news, you just get a little clip from a speech that just stands on its own, and because it's only 3, 5, 10 seconds at the most, it's generally going to be something emotional or shocking or provocative. We never get to hear the whole speech. And guess what? Because everything is sound bites on the news, most politicians make their speeches as a series of sound bites. In other words, there is no logical movement from, these are my presuppositions, these are my foundational principles. I'm going to build on this to give you my platform and what I want to do, and then I'm going to tell you what consequences I think that will happen 10 years later. Doesn't happen anymore. It's just sound bites back and forth. And what happens is we end up on the surface and we never explore the underlying assumption or paradigm, or as we all say today, worldview. Right? Did you know that worldview is actually one word, not two words? And that's because it is a direct translation of a German word, Weltanschauung. Okay, all the Germans have those giant compound words that go on forever. Okay, so that's why technically there's no space. There used to be, but now you're supposed to write it as one word, worldview. We need to raise up a generation that can uncover assumptions, or again, they're just going to be blindly led by their nose unless they can uncover. Here, just give you a good example. This is, I think, pretty conservative crowd like I am. We fight about creation versus evolution, as we should, but sometimes we don't want to move beyond 6 literal days or 6 figurative days. Now, I think that's an important fight. But underneath that fight of literal or figurative is a much deeper worldview. And that worldview sounds like this. Is the nature of reality top down, or is the nature of reality bottom up? Right? We need to understand that, right? And if we're Christians, we should be fighting for a top down, okay? Because in the beginning, God. That's the most revolutionary thing ever said in the ancient world. Not in the beginning stuff, which is what every mythology says, but in the beginning, God. Right? We believe that God is not only the origin of the universe, God is the origin of our soul, God is the origin of goodness, truth, and beauty, and everything. What I'm saying is we need to understand that a lot of times we're only fighting on the surface and we never dig down more deeply. Yeah, I'll give you a little worldview quiz, okay? If you read, I don't know, the Cambridge Study Bible or something, right? Now you know, can somebody tell me what happened in 70 AD? What major event happened in 70 AD for Christians? There was the destruction of the temple, okay? The Romans came in, destroyed the temple, okay? Now, a lot of times you'll read a note that says, okay, that the Gospel of Mark must have been written or at least reached its final state after 70 AD. And you're like, well, how did they come up with that? Okay? Well, you know when they're coming up with that? Why are they saying the Gospel of Mark, all the Gospels, have to have been written after 70 or at least reached their final state? Why? Can somebody tell me? What do the Gospels include from Jesus? A prediction, a very, very accurate prediction. Not one stone will be left upon another. Okay. Now, so if Jesus made that prediction and it came true in 70 AD, then the Gospels must have been written after 70 AD. Okay, explain to me the worldview assumption that's not being admitted to. Okay? Okay, that Jesus is God, right? And we're denying that Jesus is God, and we're also just denying the possibility of what? Say it again? Go to the supernatural, in this case specifically, prophecy. Okay? Now, the only way you can have prophecy, I don't mean guessing, okay? I remember my buddy, like I know him, Ronald Reagan said that God created economists to make fortune tellers look good. Do you remember that? That was one of my favorite lines, okay? I'm aging myself now. Anyway, You cannot have real prophecy unless you have a God that's outside of time and space, right? You can have guessing, and that's why, well, maybe it reached its final form. So in other words, if Jesus made 100 predictions, one or two of them could easily have come true, right? Any of us could do that if we make enough predictions, right? What I'm getting at is we need to go deeper and look at the assumption, right? Whenever you read a study Bible that comes up with a scientific explanation for every miracle in the Bible, it's because they don't believe miracles are possible, because they think that the laws of nature cannot be affected. But the guy that created the laws of nature, it seems like he should be able to bend them now and then. Okay? So this is what I mean. We got to get them thinking more deeply. Finally, we've got a lot of brave Christian apologists out there who are reminding us that what we know of as modern science only rose up in Christian countries. The Chinese and the Indians invented a lot of things long before anybody in the West invented them. But science was not born in those countries. Not because those people are less intelligent than we are, but because the people in Asia, and in Asia generally speaking, see the world as illusion, right? Only in the West, where they believed that God created the universe, that God is a God of harmony, balance, and order, and He created a universe of balance and order, that gave the early modern scientists like Copernicus and Galileo and Newton and all of these other people, it gave them the faith that if they looked for laws and principles, they would find them. Also, they had the faith that we could trust our senses. You see what I mean? We keep fighting up here. We don't realize that the real war is down there in the world view. So that's what you're teaching your students to do. And that's one of the best things that classical education does. So that, again, uncover assumptions. The next thing I call making connections. I think most of you know this. You know, when you went to school, wasn't the most exciting part of school when you were in class and your history professor said something that suddenly segued with your science class and your math class? You know that? We call that an aha moment. The light bulb goes off. Now, I've had so many light bulbs go off, you know what happened? Burned off all my hair, okay? I used to have a full head of hair, and you know, actually, I have the same amount of hair I did when I was 15. It's just my brain keeps growing. But it's that light bulb, okay? And one of the wonderful things about classical education is it is intrinsically interdisciplinary. Now, we need to win that phrase back, because a lot of secular academia sort of stole that and used it for all sorts of weird things. But this idea in a classical that it's interdisciplinary means that we're looking for the connections between all the disciplines. We want you to learn the disciplines, but we also want you to see that there are connections between them. And that's why most classical schools, when you get to rhetoric school, you'll have some of those omnibus classes where you're looking at history and literature and philosophy and sometimes art and music all together. Because we want to make those connections, and we understand that in many ways wisdom comes from that, right? And it's also the joy of learning. Just like those little kids take joy in memorizing, and the logic students take joy in winning in their debate, okay? Oftentimes the high schoolers take joy when they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, everything I'm learning is coming together, right? So, and by the way, anybody here share my love of the movie Dead Poet Society? Huge fan. I've raised my kids on that. And I think my son's going to do it. I've encouraged him to. If he doesn't do it, I'll write the essay. But I want him to write the essay about that. Because you do understand that, most of us love Dead Poet Society, but the school they're making fun of is really a classical school, okay? Agricoli, okay? But the point of, and this is what I talked about with my son, is that school is a dead classical school. It's a classical school that still has the form, or I guess let's use the Bible term, still has the letter, but has lost the spirit, right? That's the problem. There's no joy in what they're doing, right? People have so much fun. At my son's school, on the 100th day of school, all the kindergartners dress up as if they were 100 years old and march around. Do they do that here? Something like that? They're all wearing suspenders and they got walkers and stuff, and it's great. It's wonderful. And I don't understand modern technology. My grandmother had a walker too. It's like with all our technology, every old person you see secures it by cutting a tennis ball in half and sticking it on the bottom. Can we not invent something that actually works? But that everybody does it. Yeah, any of you have that? You know what I'm talking about? Everywhere you see it. Let's say, oh yeah, tennis, anyone? Okay. Anyway, so and finally, number 4 is what I call enter the dialogue. Okay? We are inviting our students, starting when they're kids, but they're maybe not going to fully realize it until they get a little bit older. We are inviting them into the great conversation that has been going on since the Pentateuch was written, the 5 books of Moses, and the Iliad and the Odyssey over here, and everything in between. We are inviting them to join and add their voice to it. And we understand that it is a dialogue, that it is a conversation, because we don't want our students to be like the people in the 60s. Do you remember the 2-word motto of the 60s? Question authority, okay? We don't want them to throw it out just because it's old, but we also don't want them to just accept everything blindly because it's old. We want them to respect it because it is traditional and has made it through the era and has taught people. You need to respect it, but that doesn't mean you're going to agree with every single thing in there. And so, I'm going to give you another reason why I've lost my hair. What we do with our students, imagine that my head is a raw piece of wood. And the great books are a lathe. You know what a lathe is? You put the wood against it and it shapes it. And you are literally shaping your brain through a dialogue with the great books. So exciting to see them do it. Have any of you actually overheard your kids talking about Homer? Not Homer Simpson, but the real one? Actually talking about it? I mean, it's exciting. They're debating about Plato or something like that. And they're not talking about the stuff that you make things out of, okay? I'll tell you, this is a true story. This is when I spoke in Austin, a long time ago. My daughter was 5 or 6. And I was, with the adults over here, we're all talking. And whenever you talk with me, I'm going to bring up Plato sooner or later. So we're talking. And all of a sudden, my little daughter, 5 years old, Daddy, and she stands up in the chair, Daddy, I know Plato. Oh, look, she said, Plato. We used it in school. We made a flower at it. And everybody, when a kid's that cute, it actually takes away your energy. You actually have to sit down for 5 minutes. I couldn't speak. It was just so cute. That's Plato. By the way, when I use my dictaphone and I say Plato, it always comes out as the stuff. I guess I'm not pronouncing it Plato, not Plato. So I'm saying it that way, Plato. This phone is good, but it gets my name wrong every time. Lou, L-U-L-I-U, Blue, okay? Loop. It can't get Lou. It doesn't have. I thought it's supposed to learn this. Every time it gets it wrong. Anyway, okay. But I still like my phone. Okay. It's just great. I don't have to bring anything with me. You check into the plane with your phone. You do everything with your phone. If I lose it, I'm dead. Okay, so what I want to do, how much time do we have? We still have some time, right? Okay, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Okay, what we talked about so far are kind of the skills that we're learning and instilling in our students. But I want to give you real quickly a more global view of what's happening in a classical education and why it's so different. I'm going to talk to the students tomorrow, and I may focus a little more on this part. Okay, first of all, this is obvious, but let me say it. A classical school is not a vocational school. We're not here to teach a specific skill. Now, this may surprise you. If I had my way, I would bring back real vocational schools to America. If I had my way, I would bring back apprenticeships if we can bring them back. Because those things are great. Because a liberal arts education is not for everyone, especially between the ages of 18 and 21. Right? The trouble is, because we've lost our vocational schools, liberal arts schools are becoming vocational schools in disguise. Right? Now, when I say that a classical education is liberal arts education, they are basically equivalent. The trouble is that the meaning of liberal arts has been so watered down, we can't use it anymore. It's just like when everybody, including Madonna, wears a cross, it ceases to have any. So what did we do? Come on. What did we do as Christians? Because we really wanted people to know we were a believer, but we know that the cross has become a piece of jewelry. So what image did we start using? Come on, you've all seen it on a bumper of a car. The fish, right? The ichthus fish, okay? By the way, if you put a fish on your car, please drive like a Christian. Yeah, nothing worse than being cut off and seeing the fish. It's as if the fish is laughing at you, okay? Now, the atheists came back. They invented the Darwin fish. Have you seen it? The Darwin fish with feet, and then I saw an ichthus fish eating the Darwin fish. It became the fish wars, okay? But the point is that we shouldn't have to use the word classical education because that's what liberal arts was until very recently. But because it's been watered down and has lost its meaning, we need to say it. But liberal arts, what does that mean? What word sounds like liberal? Liberate, okay? It comes from the word for freedom, liber, right? And a liberal arts education is supposed to free the mind for critical thinking and creative contemplation. Maybe that's the way I would put it. Freeing the mind for critical thinking and creative contemplation. And that is what a classical education is. It is liberal arts to the core, right? And it believes that it's worth studying these things as an end in themselves. Now, this is not about learning a specific skill, but when you study the liberal arts, you are gaining skills, okay? But you're gaining them along the way, right? It's not overly utilitarian. It's about going through these books and wrestling with them and learning them, all of these things. So it's liberal arts. Number two, and you know, I've been doing this for 20, every year I speak, it becomes more insane. I was just telling Ty, you find that there are teachers around the country now that are bragging that they cut out the Odyssey from 9th grade. And have you seen those articles? Okay? There are people priding themselves on cutting out the, I just told Ty, I'm going to start saying, so why are you discriminating against this blind author? They'll get some brownie points. That's got to be some kind of, anyway. So, classical education is based in the great books. Okay, we call them the great books. We call it the canon, the great books of the Western intellectual tradition. That's the long phrase. We're talking about everything from Homer and Virgil and Dante and Milton, Plato and Aristotle and Cicero and Herodotus and Thucydides, all of them, right? The great books, right? And most know, when you get closer to the modern period, people will debate, okay? But up through the Renaissance, even through the 18th century, we know who the major people are, okay? That's really not a fight. What we believe in classical education and liberal arts until the modern period is that these great books are there, not because they were written by dead white male heterosexuals, okay? But because they deal with issues of permanent, enduring importance. These are the books that our founding fathers studied and created our nation. I love the founding fathers because it's one of the few times that people actually learn from history. It actually rarely happens, right? We don't learn and then we repeat it. But they actually, and I mean, the place where you understand that the best is reading the Federalist Papers. Because in the Federalist Papers, they are, read them from beginning to end. They're not only mentioning, as you would expect, Greece and Rome, they're mentioning a bunch of other different leagues, smaller leagues. They mention the Carthaginians. They also mention a lot of the things that happened in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, like Venice and stuff. They studied it all. And I hate to admit this because I am a Greek. All 4 of my grandparents were born in Greece and came to us, so I'm a full-blooded Greek. But I hate to admit this, but when our founding fathers drew up our democracy, they generally used the Greeks as a bad example, okay? It is the Roman Republic, okay? The Greek system sounds cool, but it fell apart pretty quickly, okay? And there are people, oh, we should do this. Okay, no. There are some people, we just run our country by what do they call that thing? A plebiscite, where everybody votes on the computer, and we decide everything like that, okay? That's, the ancient Greek Athenian democracy was not democracy by election, it was democracy by selection. Imagine if we ran the government the way we run jury duty. That's basically how they run the government. Of course, nowadays it might be better, because anything's better. But we'll just take over. Yeah, okay. So, we're all, I told Ty, I laughed about this for the last 20 years, but now, maybe we will secede. All of us. Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, we'll just drop off. We got the whole port over here, and it'll be great, okay? Yeah, that's the real reason why Texas has its own grid, okay? And we're not admitting it, but that's so we can just break off whenever we want. Crazy. Were you guys freezing too? No. Oh, you didn't? That's right, you were okay. My parents lived down in Tarpon Springs, Florida. That's the Greek sponge docks of Florida. It's a great place. So, okay, so what are we saying? What am I saying when I say these have enduring value? Okay, the idea is, you might have heard this before. One of the poets said about Shakespeare, Shakespeare was not for an age, but for all time. What we mean by that is, of course, Shakespeare was influenced by the time in which he lived, by the political structure, everything. But somehow, through his artistic genius, he was able to touch on issues and themes of perennial importance, and not just for people living in the West, but all around the world. The Japanese love Shakespeare, and if you're a nerd like me, you will know that Hamlet sounds better in the original Klingon. Remember that line in one of the Star Trek movies? Somebody actually says that. Shakespeare sounds better in the original Klingon. And I do believe some nerd translated all of Hamlet into Klingon. Okay? I just bought my son Winnie the Pooh in Latin. Do any of you own that? Any Latin teachers here? Do you own it? It's really good. And I just saw that they've now translated the first Harry Potter all into Latin. That's pretty cool. So if you want to, but you have to get the Winnie the Pooh one because it's exactly like the old one. It's got all the illustrations and everything. And at least according to Amazon, this is the only book in Latin that's a bestseller. So I believe that. Anyway, so again, we believe that they were able to transcend or rise above their moment to join that great dialogue, right? And again, you need to understand that, you've probably heard this before, but it's true. We argue, our founding fathers in our founding, was it a secular Enlightenment thing or was it a Judeo-Christian thing? Well, it sort of is both, okay? Some of it was secular Enlightenment learning coming out of John Locke. But the only reason it works is because it's instituted by a virtuous, morally self-regulating people, which is what John Adams said, right? The system can't work unless they are virtuous and morally self-regulating, right? So it only works. That's why, I was naively optimistic back with George W. Bush that we're going to build democracies in the Middle East. I wanted to believe it. A lot of you probably wanted to believe it, but it doesn't work. People don't become free just because they vote, right? What if there's only one person to vote for, right? But as Americans, we seem to think that voting is magic. Like we vote and everything's wonderful, okay? I'm not even going to talk about what happened a few months ago. All right. Not even going to go there. But again, we need to understand that unless it's there in the people, and that was the famous John Adams, the system we built is only meant for a religious Christian people. It can't work for anybody else because they won't have that ability to do it. So, what is a classical education about? What did liberal arts used to be about? It's about forming virtuous, morally self-regulating citizens, okay? It's about building citizens. It's also about building ladies and gentlemen, which may actually be more important than building citizens today, okay? Wow. right, number 3, tied to this, okay? One of the wonderful things about classical schools, and this is true of colleges like mine as well, whenever possible, we move away from the textbook and we use the actual great books themselves, generally in translation, but we use the real books themselves, and if we can, in their entirety. Sometimes you need, bits and pieces, but in their entirety. What's the problem with textbooks? They bend the past to fit our own modern prejudices and perspectives. Now, there are some good. Finally, classical schools are trying to make up their own readers. Okay, I've got a few books out there where I'm trying to do that myself. We need to do this slowly, but generally take them to the book. I'll tell you, most of Plato's dialogues are easier to understand than books about Plato's dialogues, okay? Unless they're a really, really good writer. It's just easier to dig into Plato himself and literally join the conversation. You're all familiar with what's called 1619. It's the new curriculum because 1620 is Mayflower, but 1619 apparently is when the first slave was brought to the Americas. Now, we have to deal with it. We had slavery. We had some really bad things in our past. But we don't want that to define us as a nation. And that's what a textbook does. It has a certain slant, and bring this up, your kids probably don't need to know this, okay? But I tell my students, when I teach the Iliad, and we look at the famous farewell between Hector and Andromache, right? And I tell them, and this has been going on for a long time, okay? Even when I was a kid, I was going to school in the 70s, okay? And what they taught us in social studies, because there is no history taught in the public school. It's only social studies. There's no real history. What they teach you is, before the modern period, all men looked upon their wives as chattel slavery. Okay? And you just need to stop and put that in perspective and say, you're talking about my grandma. You people say Meemaw, like they say in Texas. Okay? You're talking about my Mimi, my Meemaw. I said, no, was that it? Was your grandfather abusive like that? Read the literature. Okay? That's the only place you're going to find out what they were really like. Read about people like Antigone and stuff like that. And then you'll see what the people are really. You want to understand what the Middle Ages was really like? Read something called The General Prologue to the Canterbury Tales and understand everything that it was like and meet real people from that time. And don't let them convince you of that, right? Don't let them convince you of that because it's just not true. There were some bad husbands and there were some bad wives, okay? But we have this idea that everybody before our age was just, oppressed, right? And we've got our own kinds of oppression, okay? So bring your students into the books themselves, right? If you have a textbook, make sure it's one that is helping the great book to speak rather than imposing its own agenda on it, okay? Right? And watch out for language. In Texas, we unrolled the Common Core. And at first, that means they're all going to read Homer and Virgil? No, it doesn't. Sounds like that, but that's not what it means. I was so naive to think that when Oprah Winfrey started her reading club, that they were going to be reading Plato. No, they only read books about people that are victims, okay? That's basically what Oprah does, okay? I mean, I guess it's good that they read rather than not reading at all, okay? But let's get them into these great books. And you know what's really ironic, folks? A lot of times they teach what's called non-canonical literature. But if you don't know the canonical literature, the non-canonical literature makes no sense to you, right? I mean, if you're watching a parody movie but have never seen any, if you're watching a parody Western but have never seen any of the real Westerns, then you're just missing it, okay? You're not getting it, right? So we need to get them in there. Number 4, and this is, okay. What messed up liberal arts education? A lot of people will say, it's the business majors that destroyed education. And the engineers said, no, it's not, okay? Those people mind their own business, and then they usually go out and make money and give it to the school, okay? In fact, I would say that globally speaking, a lot of times my favorite audiences to speak are doctors, lawyers, engineers, and businessmen in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who missed the humanities going up and now are hungry for it. Because if you want to know why literature is important, don't ask some 18-year-old goth English major, okay? That kid doesn't know anything. Ask a 60-year-old engineer, and he will tell you why the humanities are important, because he's lived long enough to understand that we have to ask questions, even if we're not even religious. We need to ask, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I know I'm of value? All of these things we need to ask. So, I did a couple series with a group called The Teaching Company, or the Great Courses, and a lot of their biggest clientele are we would call them left-brain thinkers today, right? but people who have grown and now and some of those folks are the parents of students who are enjoying learning along with their students. Please encourage that, okay? You ever do a parents' reading group, get the parents together? Encourage them to think and learn. It's wonderful. They're open. They want to learn. They're often the biggest advocates. Okay, if you ask me what destroyed the modern liberal arts, I'll tell you the social sciences, okay? Psychology, sociology, pedagogy, anthropology. Now, I'm not saying they're all bad. There's some good people out there doing good work. But the modern social sciences are absolutely founded on a secular humanist, usually anti-Christian foundation, coming out of Freud, coming out of Marx, coming out of Nietzsche, all of that stuff. Okay. Even if you're not a Christian, okay, the Bible offers us what I would call Christian realism. The only way I can explain the human race, the only way I can explain that the same human race can create a Hitler and a Mother Teresa, and of course you know it's much more confusing than that, because every single one of us has a little Hitler and a little Mother Teresa inside of us, okay? The only thing that can explain that is what the Bible says. We were created good in God's image, but we are now fallen and depraved, okay? That is the center of understanding. And if you lose either one of that, you destroy humanity, okay? You need to understand that the real thing that's motivating much of progressivism, the Black Lives Matter, all of it, is something called identity politics. And identity politics does not treat people as it all goes back to Karl Marx. It doesn't treat people as individuals. You're all part of a group. And the way groups work is one has more power and one has less power. Okay, you're all, many of you are probably aware of the sort of liberal economist who says that the economy is a zero-sum game. What that means is, if I get $10 more, I've necessarily stolen it from you. Okay, now they have a zero-sum view of power. Okay. There's only so much power, and you are either the one with power and therefore the oppressor, or the one without power and the oppressed. You're either the victim or the victimizer. And everybody fits into those groups. That's what identity politics means, right? It's unbelievable because, you know, the people that are for identity politics are obviously going to tell you that something like apartheid is wrong. But I ask you, why is it wrong? The only reason it's wrong is because we all have innate value and essential worth, and any kind of prejudice is taking away your essential value. But they don't believe that, okay? They don't believe that we are made in the image of God. Now, if you don't believe that we are made in the image of God and therefore have intrinsic value and worth, what that will lead to is that you just use people as cogs in a wheel. And that's what happens in almost any totalitarian society. Then we can be reprogrammed or changed at will. But you need the other part. You need the part that we're fallen and depraved. Because if you forget that we're fallen, then you'll keep trying to build utopia. And almost all the horror of the last couple hundred years, really starting with the French Revolution today, almost all of that horror was a group of people trying to build utopia. But they can't do it unless they purge out the people that are stopping us from getting there. Okay? Re-education. I didn't think I would hear it, but on the news they're talking about people that need to be re-educated. Okay? This actually happened in places like Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, happened under Maoist China, happened under the Soviet Union, right? At least the Nazis just killed you, okay? I think I'd rather be killed than reprogrammed, okay? But anyway, but what I'm getting at here is that once you think that human beings are perfectible, then you will do anything to make them perfect. And that includes wiping out people that can't be fixed or changing them if they can. Okay? We need to, that is the core danger. And folks, most of modern education is based on a guy named John Dewey. John Dewey was a sort of disciple, not literally, but a disciple of Darwin. Okay, and Darwinism basically says we have no essential worth and value. It's survival of the fittest, right? I mean, Hitler was actually right if Darwin's right, okay? Of course, I don't think either one of them was right, okay? Margaret Sanger was right if Darwin's right, because she's going to practice eugenics and get rid of the poor and other people like that, the undesirables, okay? So he was very much a disciple of Darwin, but he was also a disciple of Rousseau. Ever heard of Jean-Jacques Rousseau? One of the sort of fathers and architects of the French Revolution. He's the one that said, the problem with man is not sin, disobedience, and rebellion. The problem with man is ignorance and poverty. Now, wouldn't that be nice if the only problem with us was ignorance and poverty? That means if we eliminate those two, everything will be perfect. That's not true. And by the way, nobody's done more than Christians to alleviate ignorance and poverty. Okay? Right? And I'm guessing this is mostly a Protestant crowd, but we can thank the Catholics because most of the hospitals are still Catholic, okay? And a lot of the schools are Catholic too, and then we followed along, okay? But you need to understand that as Christians, we should do all we can to alleviate ignorance by teaching and to alleviate poverty by helping, right? But we have to be realistic at the same moment and know that a poor person can be just as evil as a bad person. Now, you need to understand this identity politics, this social justice, this Black Lives Matter. Okay, if you go back about 30 years ago, a lot of good Catholics, believing Catholics, were fooled by something called liberation theology. Liberation theology was Marxism with a very slight veneer of Catholicism, and it sucked everybody in. Today, Black Lives Matter is doing the same thing to Protestants, okay? And particularly evangelicals. It's saying, well, it's got to be right. It's about nice and kindness. Well, yeah, but that's not what it's about, okay? It's got a view of man that cannot be sustained because it's wrong, okay? We are in God's image, and we have intrinsic value and worth that cannot be taken away. But we are also fallen and depraved. That's why, what did our founding fathers mean? Why do we need a government that has checks and balances? Because men are, you know the phrase? Men are not, come on, somebody knows this from the Federalist Papers. Men are not angels. Have you ever heard that? Okay, that's what the people that wrote the, I don't remember if it's a song in Hamilton or not. Okay, but Hamilton was one of the writers. I don't think they said that. Did they say it in Hamilton? Men are not angels. They did. Okay, I finally watched it on Disney. It's pretty cool. It took me a while to get into it, but once you get into it, it is pretty compelling. My kids got me the music, but I can't play that nonsense. So I just look, wait, but that's gobbledygook. I can't play that. Okay, maybe you've had an electric guitar or something. Okay, anyway, but don't get me started by talking about electric guitars. Okay, anyway, the men are not angels. In other words, we are not perfect. We're not perfectible. That's why we need checks and balances. That's why we have not a direct democracy like they had in ancient Greece, but a representative democracy like they had in Rome. The Roman Republic lasted 500 years, by the way. And some of it still existed even during the empire, okay? So what we do is that we elect people to represent us, and those people get in a deliberative body and deliberate. They explain this very well. This is a way to kind of deal away with passions and things like that. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why, explain to your students why we have the Electoral College, okay? The Electoral College is one of many checks and balances so that cities don't control small places, okay? That's why every single state, even if they're Rhode Island, get 2 senators, right? Texas and Rhode Island get 2 senators, but Texas gets a whole lot more representatives, right? By the way, this is their original intent. We don't really do this nowadays, but the original intent really was that the senators would have been the more aristocratic people. Of course, the senators today still think that's true, even though it's not. But they were the more aristocratic people, and the House of Representatives should have been the more common people. Now, that was also kind of implicit. I don't know if they say it, but it's sort of implicit. But all of these things are ways to prevent. Because again, if we had a straight vote, then everybody in the cities will get all the power. Right? So there are reasons for it. But the reasons are because we need checks and balances. Right? We need limits. Now, traditionally a conservative believes the best way to limit violence and injustice is not by having a police state, but by instilling values in our students and children by an education like this, by the church and everything. That's the best way to do it, right? And the more we fail in that, the more we're going to need more restrictive police state kinds of things because we've not instilled those. And let me end with this point because it's getting late. A classical education is an education in virtue. Right? It's absolutely essential to what we are doing is the instilling of virtue. Now, maybe I'll come back next year and give you a whole speech about virtue, but I'll just give this to you in a nutshell. I used to think that public schools went bad because they threw out virtue altogether. It might have been better if they had. What really happened is that they didn't throw out virtue, they replaced the traditional virtues with phony virtues, with what they call values. As far as I can tell, there are 5 values taught in public schools and colleges. Tolerance, inclusivism, egalitarianism, environmentalism, and multiculturalism. There might be a few more we can add to it, okay? Now, I'm not saying those things are evil, okay? It's good to be tolerant, but tolerance has never been the center of virtue. And anyway, what do you mean by tolerance? A Christian means by tolerance, we need to treat everybody well because everybody's made in the image of God and has intrinsic value and worth. That's not what the modern world means by tolerance. It means I'll overlook your sin if you overlook my sin, okay? Environmentalism, if it meant stewardship of nature, I got no problem. But what it means is that man is the problem, man is the infestation. You see, if multiculturalism really meant respecting all cultures, I would be fine with it. I try to do that because Houston, we're one of the most diverse schools in the whole country, right? But that's not what they mean by it. What they mean by it is Western civilization is horrible and let's use other civilizations to crush it. But if your Hispanic kids come in and say they value their family, well, no, we don't like you either. You see what I mean? Multicultural doesn't really mean respect. It means let's throw out the old system and bring in progressive. So it doesn't even mean what they say it means, okay? But virtue, we need to instill the real virtues: courage, wisdom, self-control, justice, obviously faith, hope, and love, honesty, all of these things. How many of you raised your kids on the book of Virtues by William Bennett? Anybody recognize that? A really good book. He was the head of education. You want to hear a funny story? I know I'm getting late, but this is actually a true story. Okay, I teach at Houston Baptist University. Right? Many years ago, might have been 20 years ago, but we invited William Bennett to come speak at one of our fundraisers, the big thing they do every year. And I was all excited, and then last minute, they disinvited him. Does anybody remember what came out about William Bennett about 20 years ago? Do you know? Do you know? You don't remember? Okay, he was a high-stakes gambler. Okay, now he didn't do anything illegal or immoral, so to speak, but Baptists and gambling, Now, Baptists, we don't gamble. Really, it's just because we're too cheap. We don't want to lose. I mean, good Lord, I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church. Do you know we raised money for our church one time? We raffled off a Cadillac, okay? And you know what you do when you raffle off a Cadillac? They're like $100 tickets. And you pull every single ticket out and the last one wins because everybody wants to make sure it's in there, right? I mean, that's how the Catholic Church has supported itself forever, by playing bingo. I don't understand Baptists, okay? I'm doing a little bit stand-up comedy, but it's kind of fun today. I don't understand Baptists. We hire people to come in to teach us how to do a new fundraising initiative. But all Baptists know how to do is ask their parishioners for more money. They don't do anything actually creative. Just another way to ask for more money. What did you hire that person for? So anyway, do you know the famous Greek church in Houston that raises their entire year by doing a Greek festival? 250,000 people go through the festival over like a week. They probably didn't have it probably during COVID. They probably lost everything. But anyway, let me just end. Okay. One of your jobs, and this starts in grammar school, but it goes right up to rhetoric school, okay? You not only have to teach your students traditional virtues, you need to teach them how to feel about virtue. You have to do what C.S. Lewis called building up the chest. Like when my son was young, and if I said, Alex, you did something responsible, I'm proud of you. What does a little boy do when you say that? What does his body do? Like that, right? See it? Alex, you were very cruel to your sister. I'm ashamed of you. Now, what did I then say? but I still love you. And I hug him. You probably don't want to hug your student. Probably get arrested. Okay. Pretty soon you might get arrested for hugging your own kids. But anyway, notice I don't say, but it's not important. No, it's actually very important. But I still love you and you're still of value. Okay? You did something wrong, you did something cruel, but I value you, right? And I know that you're better than that. We have got, okay, I've mentioned I teach the Iliad all the time, right? And the Iliad takes place in what we today would call a shame and blame culture, right? Now, generally speaking today, the shame cultures are like in Asia, places like China, Middle East, Muslim countries. And again, in modern America, we have completely demonized the idea of a shame culture. But when you completely throw out shame, you are going to create a race of monsters, okay? Here's something to take away today. Do you know that pain is a blessing? Do you know what would happen to you if you felt no pain? Well, there was a great Christian missionary doctor named Paul Brand who discovered that what happens when you have leprosy, at least a certain kind of leprosy, is that it destroys your central nervous system, and so you feel no pain, right? That's why lepers literally fall apart, right? If we didn't have pain sensors, okay, we would not protect ourselves, right? Man, you get something in your eye, it hurts so much you'll go crazy till you get it out, right? Sometimes people that are diabetic lose any pain sensation in their toes, and sometimes that can actually lead to amputations and stuff. Okay, so now, we live in a fallen world. So if you get cancer, your pain signal may get broken, and you will need to go on painkillers, right? So ideally, pain is a signal that there's something wrong with our body, and you better fix it, right? But because we live in a fallen world, your pain system can break, and then you need morphine or something like that. Okay, why did I just tell you that? Because the same way that pain is a signal that there's something wrong with our body, guilt and shame are signals that there's something wrong with our soul. And ever since Freud, we've been taught that guilt is the problem. Guilt is the signal that there is a problem, okay? Now again, we live in a fallen world. If you have some kind of shell shock or you're raped or something and you have a real PTSD, you will have an unhealthy kind of guilt that needs to be dealt with drugs and talk, hopefully something, a little bit of both. Okay, so not all shame is good. There is shame that's like having cancer, what that does to pain. But shame and guilt are necessary to form us into virtuous creatures who will not destroy ourselves, okay? So understand, you need to reinforce virtue in students. That is as important as what you're teaching them is how you are teaching them and how you are forming their character. I knew my son would be a great classical teacher when we sat down and watched together The Emperor's Club. Anybody seen that? Oh, you have it? The Emperor's Club? You never seen it? Oh my gosh, it's this guy that teaches Latin, and he does the Julius Caesar thing, and one of his students cheats, right? And it's all about that. And there's a scene where the father lets him get away with it. And he says, you need to tell me how to help your father, or how can I form his character? And the father says, that's not your job, that's my job. And of course, he's doing a terrible job. And I saw my son get red hot angry. So it's good, you're going to be a good teacher, okay? Because that is part of our job. Character formation is part of, hopefully in, dialogue with the parents. We're not taking them away from the parents, but that is part of our job, right? And I'll tell you what really makes me happy. You don't see this in public schools. When you see high school students here go down and talk to the grammar school students and encourage them, you know how much that means to 8-year-old kids? What that role model means? It doesn't happen in public schools, okay? That needs to happen more, okay? You need to, oh my God, I can tell you something. Let me close in prayer, and then I'll hang around and talk. Well, you know what? I'll go over to the book signing and come and ask me questions, okay? You don't have to buy a book to ask me a question. Just go ask me a question. All the books are $10. I brought my little ones, and they weren't too heavy either. So anyway, Father in heaven, I thank you so much for the school. I thank you here for the staff, the faculty, the parents. I thank you for the sacrifices they are making to work here, to bring their children here. Lord, I just pray that you give the people in this room a jolt of energy, a sense and a vision of the importance of what they are doing, the formation of character in an age that has thrown out character. Lord, I pray that the people in this room and the students that they teach would be salt and light in this state and in our country, Lord, that they would help to stem the decay that has been setting in and bring us back to our real traditions, our real values. And Lord, I just pray that your Spirit would give them the grace to do that. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.